There are 8 signs you're not meant for this world, and Carl Jung discovered that people who carry these signs experience reality in ways that most humans simply cannot comprehend. You see patterns others miss entirely. Social situations drain your life force instead of energizing you. Authority figures trigger a deep, instinctive resistance you can't explain. And most shocking of all, conventional success feels completely hollow and meaningless, no matter how much you achieve. Picture this moment. You're sitting in a crowded room, surrounded by people laughing, talking, seemingly connected, but you feel completely alone. Not lonely, but alone in the way that comes from seeing the world through different eyes. You watch the social rituals, the unspoken rules, the collective behaviors, and you think, how did I end up among these strange creatures? Jung understood this feeling intimately. He wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe." But he discovered something profound about people who experience this fundamental sense of not belonging. What I call the outsider consciousness isn't a disorder to be fixed. It's a different way of processing reality that serves an essential function in human development. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. The feeling of not belonging isn't evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that you possess what Jung called psychological differentiation, the ability to separate your consciousness from what he termed collective thinking. Most people, Jung observed, live in what I call hive mind consciousness. They think the thoughts that everyone else thinks, feel comfortable with the beliefs everyone else holds, and find security in blending into the crowd. Jung wrote, "The individual is increasingly deprived of moral decision-making and ethical independence." But some people cannot function this way. They experience what Jung called the tension of opposites. They're simultaneously part of humanity, yet psychologically separate from mass consciousness. This creates the persistent feeling that you're observing human behavior from the outside, like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. Jung found that this isn't a character flaw, it's psychological evolution in action. These individuals serve as what I call consciousness scouts, exploring psychological territories that the masses aren't ready to enter yet. Jung identified specific patterns in people who experience this fundamental separation from collective consciousness, what I call the 8 markers of the differentiated mind. And if you recognize these in yourself, you're witnessing what Jung considered the emergence of authentic individuality. The first sign is what I call pattern recognition overdrive. Jung observed that differentiated individuals naturally perceive connections, systems, and underlying structures that remain invisible to conventional thinking. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." You've likely experienced this awakening, the ability to see through surface appearances to underlying realities. You might notice how people's words contradict their energy, how social systems maintain dysfunction by design, or how collective beliefs serve to keep individuals unconscious. This isn't paranoia or overthinking. It's what Jung called superior perception, the capacity to see beyond consensus reality. But here's what makes this challenging. When you point out these patterns, others often react with confusion or resistance. They can't see what you see, so they assume you're imagining things. Jung understood this dynamic. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Your pattern recognition makes others uncomfortable because it forces them to question assumptions they've never examined. You become what I call the uncomfortable mirror, reflecting back realities that most people prefer to ignore. Jung's research into psychological types revealed something crucial about differentiated individuals. While most people gain energy from external stimulation and social interaction, you experience what I call solitude restoration. This goes beyond simple introversion. Jung distinguished between social introversion and what he called psychological introversion, the need to process reality internally before engaging with the external world. He wrote, "Solitude is for me a fountain of healing which makes my life worth living." In solitude, you don't feel lonely, you feel complete. You can think your own thoughts without the interference of others' emotional states. You can process your experiences without having to perform social roles. Most importantly, you can connect with what Jung called the transcendent function, the part of your psyche that integrates conscious and unconscious material. Comment if you've always felt more energized alone than in crowds. Solitude is where I find myself. But society pathologizes this need for solitude. You've probably been told you're antisocial, depressed, or missing out on life. Jung would disagree. He found that differentiated individuals require solitude to maintain psychological equilibrium. Without it, they become overwhelmed by what Jung called psychic contamination, absorbing the unconscious projections of others. Jung observed that differentiated individuals have what I call authority resistance syndrome. This isn't rebelliousness for its own sake. It's an instinctive response to illegitimate power. Jung wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. Part of this struggle involves recognizing when authority is based on genuine wisdom versus when it's based on control and manipulation." You've probably found yourself in conflict with bosses, teachers, or other authority figures throughout your life. Not because you're defiant, but because you can sense when someone is wielding power without the corresponding wisdom or moral authority to justify it. This stems from what Jung called the archetype of the wise ruler, an innate understanding of how power should be exercised. When you encounter authority figures who abuse their position, your psyche reacts with visceral rejection. Here's where Jung's insights become revolutionary. He discovered that differentiated individuals are literally incapable of finding fulfillment in conventional definitions of success because they're oriented toward what he called individuation rather than social achievement. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But for differentiated individuals, becoming who they truly are often means rejecting everything society says they should want. You might have achieved things that others consider impressive, good grades, promotions, financial success, only to feel completely hollow inside. This isn't depression or ingratitude. It's your psyche telling you that external achievements cannot satisfy what Jung called the drive toward wholeness. But here's where this gets deeper. Jung observed that differentiated individuals often experience what I call achievement dysphoria, a profound sense of disconnection that occurs specifically when they succeed in conventional terms. The better you perform in systems you don't believe in, the more alienated you become from your authentic self. This creates internal conflict that others can't understand. Family members celebrate your promotion while you feel like you're dying inside. Friends envy your accomplishments while you wonder why you feel so empty. Jung called this the price of adaptation, when you succeed in external systems at the cost of internal authenticity. Differentiated individuals are motivated by meaning, authenticity, and service to something greater than themselves. They would rather be authentic and struggle financially than be successful and spiritually dead. This isn't idealism, it's psychological necessity. Jung discovered that these individuals possess what I call meaning detection systems, an internal compass that can sense when their actions align with their authentic purpose versus when they're just going through the motions of social expectation. This creates what I call the success paradox. The more conventional success you achieve, the more alienated you feel from your authentic self. Jung understood that this emptiness serves a purpose. It forces you to seek fulfillment through individuation rather than social conformity. Jung's work on psychological types revealed that differentiated individuals often possess what I call unconscious emotional telepathy. You naturally attune to the emotional states of others, often without realizing you're doing it. This stems from what Jung called participation mystique, a psychological state where the boundaries between self and other become permeable. While most people experience this occasionally, differentiated individuals live with it constantly. You walk into a room and immediately sense the tension, the hidden conflicts, the unspoken emotions. You can tell when someone is lying, not because of their words, but because of their energetic state. You feel others' pain, anger, and fear as if they were your own. Jung understood this as a form of heightened psychological sensitivity. He wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But for you, every encounter with another person involves this kind of chemical reaction. But here's what makes this particularly challenging for differentiated individuals. Jung observed that this emotional absorption happens automatically and unconsciously. You don't choose to feel others' emotions. It simply happens. This is why you might feel anxious in certain places without knowing why, or feel drained after spending time with specific people. Jung called this phenomenon psychic contagion, the unconscious transfer of psychological states between individuals. Most people have natural barriers that protect them from this kind of emotional overflow. But differentiated individuals often have what I call permeable psychic boundaries. This creates a unique set of challenges. You might find yourself feeling angry after talking to an angry person, even if their anger had nothing to do with you. You could feel depressed after visiting certain locations where trauma occurred. You absorb the collective emotional state of groups, which is why crowds and social gatherings feel so overwhelming. Comment if you've always absorbed others' emotions. I feel everything around me. This gift comes with a cost. You become what I call the emotional sponge, soaking up the psychological states of everyone around you. This is why crowds and social situations feel so draining. You're not just managing your own emotions, you're processing everyone else's too. Jung discovered that learning to distinguish between your own emotions and absorbed emotions is crucial for psychological health. He called this process psychological differentiation, learning to maintain your own emotional center while remaining sensitive to others. Jung discovered that differentiated individuals naturally think in what he called symbolic language. While most people relate to the world through literal, concrete thinking, you perceive reality through symbols, metaphors, and archetypal patterns. Jung wrote, "The symbol is the primitive exponent of the unconscious, but at the same time, an idea corresponding to the highest intuition produced by consciousness." You're fluent in this symbolic language because you naturally access what Jung called the collective unconscious. You find deep meaning in dreams, synchronicities, and seeming coincidences. You understand that stories like myths and fairy tales aren't just entertainment, they're expressing eternal truths through symbolic form. You see the hero's journey playing out in your own life and in the lives of others. This symbolic thinking is actually what Jung considered a more advanced form of consciousness. While literal thinking deals with surfaces, symbolic thinking perceives the deeper structures that govern reality. You might understand complex psychological or spiritual concepts intuitively, even without formal training. You recognize archetypal patterns in politics, relationships, and social dynamics. This is what Jung called archetypal perception, the ability to see through surface events to the underlying psychological forces at work. Jung made a crucial observation about differentiated individuals. They inevitably go through what he called the encounter with the unconscious, periods of intense psychological crisis that would devastate most people, but ultimately lead to greater wholeness. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Your journey toward differentiation has required you to face aspects of yourself and reality that most people spend their lives avoiding. You've probably experienced what I call initiatory crises: depression, anxiety, existential breakdown, spiritual emergency, or profound loss that stripped away everything you thought you knew about yourself and reality. But unlike others who might be broken by such experiences, you were transformed by them. Jung called this process individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness that requires integrating both light and shadow aspects of the psyche. These crises serve as what I call consciousness accelerators, forcing rapid psychological development that wouldn't happen through ordinary experience. If you've been transformed by your darkest moments, comment, "My breakdown became my breakthrough." Your suffering wasn't random or meaningless. It was what Jung called the price of consciousness, the cost of developing beyond conventional awareness into authentic selfhood. The final sign Jung identified is perhaps the most important. Despite feeling like you don't belong in this world, you feel an irresistible calling to help others develop beyond their current limitations. Jung discovered that differentiated individuals naturally become what he called agents of individuation, people who help others recognize and develop their authentic potential. This isn't a career choice, it's a psychological compulsion. You can't help but share insights, ask uncomfortable questions, and challenge others to think more deeply. You become a teacher, healer, artist, writer, or counselor, not because you chose these roles, but because these roles chose you. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But once you begin this process, you naturally want to help others claim the same privilege. You become what I call a consciousness catalyst, someone whose very presence accelerates psychological development in others. Jung understood that differentiated consciousness comes with what I call the integration challenge. How do you maintain your authentic perspective while still functioning in a world designed for collective thinking? This isn't just a practical problem, it's a psychological necessity. Jung observed that differentiated individuals must learn to navigate what he called the tension of opposites, being simultaneously part of society, yet psychologically separate from it. Jung's solution was what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between your individual truth and social reality without losing either. You learn to speak the language of the masses when necessary, while maintaining your differentiated perspective internally. This requires what I call conscious adaptation, participating in social structures without being absorbed by them, wearing social masks when necessary without identifying with them, giving others what they need while protecting your authentic self. But here's where this gets complex. Jung discovered that differentiated individuals often experience what I call identity fragmentation anxiety. Because you're constantly switching between your authentic self and your adaptive persona, you might sometimes lose touch with who you really are underneath all the social performances. Jung observed that this leads to what he called the problem of the persona. When you become too identified with your social mask, you lose connection with your authentic self. But when you reject all social adaptation, you become isolated and unable to contribute meaningfully to the world. The solution Jung proposed is what I call conscious persona management, learning to use social masks as tools rather than identities. You develop different personas for different contexts while maintaining a clear connection to your authentic core self. Jung wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. Your task isn't to fit into existing structures, but to find ways of being authentically yourself within them." This process often involves what I call social translation, learning to communicate your differentiated insights in ways that others can understand and accept. You don't water down your truth, but you present it in forms that can be received by those operating from collective consciousness. Jung discovered that mastering this integration challenge is what allows differentiated individuals to serve as bridges between different levels of consciousness. You become capable of what he called cultural participation without cultural absorption, contributing to society while maintaining psychological independence. Jung believed that differentiated individuals serve a crucial function in human psychological evolution, what I call the consciousness pioneer role, your scouts exploring psychological territories that humanity will eventually need to inhabit. While the masses maintain stability through conformity, differentiated individuals push the boundaries of what's possible. You challenge assumptions, question limitations, and refuse to accept that this is just how things are. Jung observed that every significant advance in human consciousness has been initiated by individuals who felt like they didn't belong in their current world. They were the ones who imagined possibilities beyond present limitations and had the courage to explore them. But here's what Jung understood about this evolutionary role that most people miss. Differentiated individuals don't choose their mission, they're chosen by it. You didn't wake up one day and decide to see patterns others miss or feel emotions others can't access. These capacities developed in you as part of what Jung called the collective unconscious seeking expression. Jung discovered that differentiated consciousness emerges when humanity needs to evolve beyond its current limitations. You appear in times and places where your particular form of awareness is needed for collective growth. This is why you often feel like you were born at the wrong time or in the wrong place, because your consciousness is oriented toward humanity's future rather than its present. This evolutionary function explains why your perspective often feels like a burden. Jung wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. Your role as a consciousness pioneer requires you to maintain psychological independence even when it leads to isolation and misunderstanding." Jung observed that this pioneering function operates through what he called synchronistic guidance, meaningful coincidences and intuitive insights that guide you toward your evolutionary purpose. You might find yourself repeatedly drawn to certain ideas, people, or situations that seem to accelerate your psychological development and your ability to serve others' awakening. The loneliness you feel as a differentiated individual isn't just personal isolation. It's what Jung called evolutionary tension. You're holding space for possibilities that don't yet exist in collective consciousness. This tension is uncomfortable, but necessary for psychological evolution to occur. You're not broken or defective. You're what Jung called the growing edge of consciousness, representing humanity's potential for psychological development beyond current limitations. Your very existence proves that evolution beyond present limitations is possible. One of the most challenging aspects of differentiated consciousness is what I call the relationship paradox. You desperately want authentic connection, but most people can't meet you at the depth you naturally operate from. Jung understood this dilemma. He wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Most people haven't done this inner work, so they can't recognize or relate to someone who has. You might find that relationships based on shared interests or activities feel superficial. You crave connections where you can explore ideas, share authentic emotions, and grow together psychologically. But these relationships are rare because they require both people to be committed to consciousness rather than comfort. The solution Jung discovered is what I call selective intimacy, being very careful about who you share your authentic self with while maintaining compassionate but boundaried connections with others. Jung observed that differentiated individuals often experience what I call the creative imperative, an unstoppable urge to express their unique perspective through some form of creative work. This creativity isn't about talent or artistic skill. It's about what Jung called the need to give form to inner experience. Your differentiated consciousness naturally seeks expression through writing, art, teaching, or other creative outlets. Jung wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." Your creativity emerges from this inner necessity, the compulsion to share your unique perspective with the world. Even if others don't understand or appreciate your creative expression, you can't stop yourself from creating. It's how you process your experiences and contribute your piece to the collective puzzle of human consciousness. Jung discovered that differentiated consciousness often includes what I call natural spiritual awareness, an intuitive understanding of spiritual realities that transcends religious doctrine. You might feel connected to something greater than the material world without being able to define it precisely. You experience synchronicities, meaningful coincidences, and a sense that there's an underlying intelligence governing reality. Jung called this the religious function of the psyche, not organized religion, but direct spiritual experience. He wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. Part of this struggle involves maintaining your direct spiritual connection rather than accepting inherited beliefs. This spiritual awareness often makes you uncomfortable with both rigid religious doctrine and materialistic atheism. You know there's more to reality than what can be measured, but you also know that truth can't be captured in dogmatic belief systems. So here's what Jung would want you to understand. Your sense of not belonging isn't evidence of inadequacy. It's evidence of psychological evolution in progress. You're not broken. You're developing beyond current collective limitations. The goal isn't to eliminate your differences or force yourself to fit in. Jung's approach was integration, learning to honor your authentic nature while finding ways to contribute meaningfully to the world around you. Your differentiated consciousness is both a gift and a responsibility. You see what others can't see, feel what others can't feel, and understand what others can't understand. This gives you the ability to serve as what I call a bridge between worlds, helping others develop beyond their current limitations. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For differentiated individuals, becoming who you truly are isn't just personal fulfillment, it's evolutionary service. There are 8 signs you're not meant for this world, and if you recognize them in yourself, Jung would tell you that your sense of not belonging is actually evidence of your importance to human psychological evolution. You see patterns others miss because you're meant to be a guide. Social situations drain you because you're absorbing information others can't process. You resist authority because you recognize when power lacks wisdom. Conventional success feels empty because you're oriented toward meaning rather than achievement. You absorb others' emotions, think in symbols, transform through crisis, and feel called to help others awaken because you're what Jung called an agent of individuation, someone whose very existence accelerates psychological development in others. Your differentiated consciousness isn't a burden to bear, it's a gift to share. Jung's message would be simple: stop trying to fit into this world as it is, and start helping it become what it could be. If you want to explore more about how certain individuals carry unique psychological gifts that others can exploit, check out my video on Final Warning to Empaths, They're Feeding on Your Light, where I dive deep into Jung's understanding of how sensitive individuals can protect their energy while still serving their evolutionary purpose. Your journey of not belonging is actually a journey toward becoming who you truly are. And that journey isn't just personal, it's humanity's path forward. Thanks for walking this path of understanding with me. See you in the next dimension of consciousness.